And there's always been that desire to travel, to surf, to do what I want, but also to try and figure out how I can make money whilst doing those things. All right. Welcome back to Surf and Freedom. We are taking a journey to figure out how we can actually live the life that we want, figuring out online income streams, figure out what works and what I'm learning along the way and what keeps me motivated, what keeps me pushing forward. So that's what we're doing here. If you like the idea of that, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, do all the things, share it with your mates because we're getting into the nitty-gritty and I'm going to be figuring it out in real time, and I'm dedicated to that for myself, but also for you because I feel like, yeah, there's so many people out there that have gone through the process and have figured out how to monetize different online streams, businesses, whatever it may be. And it's all good and well to watch those videos, but then I'm like, I don't understand how they did it. They tell me how they did it, but I'm like, but I didn't know the roots. I didn't know like where they came from. I didn't know, how, like, I know that they're at that point now, but how did you get there? So that's what this is all about. I just want to share my story of where I've come from, what I've done, why I'm at this point, why I'm ready to kind of figure out a more untraditional way of bringing in cash and what I'm building too, which I've shared in previous videos a little bit. We all come from different places, right? We all do different things and we have different lives, but there are striking similarities and I want to share my journey with you. So if any of that resonates with you, it might help you and motivate you to go, I can figure it out too. So pretty stock standard childhood, very blessed with a beautiful family. Went to school, did well in school, didn't really enjoy it though. Like I had fun, but I don't recall, like I was always ready to leave school, And I think a big reason for that, which I'll loop back to later, is because I didn't like being told what to do. And that's what school is. So I had a bit of a gap year, did some travel, fell in love with traveling throughout my childhood and then solidified that with a bit of a trip through Europe after I finished school. And then came back and I started uni, which that was something I felt like I needed to do. It was the thing that I felt like was the last thing I needed to do to, prove to my parents and say thank you for raising me and, supporting me. And, I'm a fully complete being now, ready to go out into the world. So I did that for a couple of years and the first year was fine. I had my fun. I was doing education, made some mates, having a good time. During that, I was in my early 20s, so I was, partying, doing things on the weekend with my mates, and that was my focus, And that period of my life was probably for about, 2.5 years. And it got to the point where it was a 4-year degree, but it got to the point where I was like, you know what? I've just got this burning desire in me that I cannot wait another year and a half because I had this foresight, but the idea was I cannot wait another year and a half to finish my degree and then go traveling. Because the vision that I had was in education, you've got to do pracs and you've got to go to a school and essentially do 6 months. This is in Australia anyway, 6 months of practicing to be a teacher at the end. And I had this vision where I knew that I was going to get offered a job from the school that I did my prac with. And I just saw how my life was going to play out. Knowing me, I wouldn't have been able to say no. I would have accepted it. It would have been, $65,000, $70,000 a year. I would have, gone and done my first year. Then I would be like, I'll just do 1 year and then I'll go traveling. And then, they'll give me a pay rise or something like that. I'll just do another year. I'll just save up. And I just saw that I was just going to get caught in the vortex, work, get a home, get into a relationship and have a family and just be in that. And this is one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. And I would recommend it to anyone is I just listened to my heart and I said, no, you know what? I'm going to do half a semester of uni and I'm going to, or like just do 2 subjects instead of 4, and I'm going to give myself the opportunity to come back to it, but I'm going to go and travel for as long as I want. I'm going to book a one-way flight. And I worked hard for that 9, 10 months. I was doing university, as I said, but I was also working 60, 70-hour weeks just to save up as much money as I could. I was still living at home, very, very grateful that I had that opportunity. I was working at a bar, so I would have my fun, working there, and I would get some nights off maybe, or, they'd sneak us a drink behind the bar or something like that. And yeah, got to have my fun in that way, but I wasn't really spending much because I was just saving up, chasing this goal. And yeah, that decision changed the course of my life significantly. And I always will remember it and be grateful that I listened to myself rather than listening to what I should have done. I just listened to myself and said, no, this is what I need to do. And I'm making the decision because this is the life I want to create. So I made that decision and I booked a one-way flight with my best mate. We went to Southeast Asia, was there for 9 months, and I tried a bunch of different things. I was teaching English, which tied in with my university degree in Vietnam. And then I went over to Canada and lived there for 9 months. And I was living in Quebec in the French-speaking part of Canada. And I couldn't get a job because I didn't speak French well enough, and I still don't. But yeah, I essentially ended up getting a job at UPS as just packing in negative 30 degrees. It was freezing. It was like go and work for like 5 hours, 6 hours and come back home with $90. And yeah, it was barely enough to live, but I was also teaching English online to students in China. And I was giving myself the chance to come back to my university degree because I felt like I wasn't sure if that was something I still wanted to continue, which is why I was having these experiences and doing this type of work. And I was in a relationship at the time, and we decided that we were going to go to South America together. And yeah, spent 6 months just I think we did a little bit of volunteering on a farm out there, on an avocado farm in the Peruvian Andes. And it was an amazing 2 years and got to come back home. And still after that 2 years, I'd kind of made this decision that I wasn't going to go back to university. I was going to commit myself to traveling the world as much as I can because I just loved it so much. And the third thing was when I got back, I was in this relationship and I felt like, we kind of had a natural direction ourselves. So it kind of took a little bit of time, as it always does, to find our feet after a long bit of travel. Lived down in Melbourne and worked as I did door knocking and sales at one point. I coached cricket. I worked on another farm. I worked in hostels, worked in cafes. And then, so tried out a lot of different things in hospitality and tourism. Left that relationship and kind of had 3 years where I was just really focused on myself and decided to be a bit more. I was a very outgoing person, but also kind of went inward a little bit and just tried to figure out who am I, in my mid-20s. And for the next, 3-4 years, I lived up in a beautiful place in Australia called Cairns, amazing tropical rainforest, absolutely beautiful. And I just kind of did the same thing. I worked in hostels, I worked on a dive boat, I worked in cafes, I did odd jobs and random laboring stuff just to kind of, get some cash to fund my lifestyle of traveling. And in that period, got to spend a lot of time with family and friends. And I went to India and Sri Lanka. I went over to Indonesia. And the thing that I'd noticed coming back from all these trips was every time I went away, I was on holidays, which was amazing. But every time I come back, I kind of felt like I had to restart. I had to restart in my financial journey. I had to either get a new job or go back to the job that I was at. And because I was only ever working in a casual position, that's a bit of a difficult thing to negotiate. So it was like I was always kind of having to restart. So travel, come back, restart, reset, save up some money, go again, travel. And it was just oscillating between this for a lot of years and has been. And Yeah, it was when I was living in Cairns that I felt like I really wanted to go to Central America. It had been something on my list for a lot of years. Um, and I got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm just going to save up and again, and I'm going to go to Central America, and then I'm going to come back, and yeah, we'll see what happens with life from there. And all the while, I'm trying to build up, various different investments. But the thing about investments is you need to have an income stream where you can contribute to those over, week in, week out, month in, month out, to really take benefit of them in the short term. In the long term, it depends what your investment strategy is, but you can kind of put a lump sum of money in and then just forget about it. But that'll be a different topic that we'll go into. But yeah, so I ended up meeting another girl, the woman that I'm with now, a beautiful lady called Coda, and we ended up going to Central America together. And it was during this time that I'd started talking to a mate um, about going into business together, and we thought about a coffee cart. And it sounded like a great idea, we could get a coffee cart and we could make coffees, and we could be our own boss, and we could go to doofs and all this sort of thing. But the thing that didn't really necessarily feel right to me was this was a business model where I would have to be locked into one place, and it would require me being there physically to make the business model work. And this was something that I didn't really feel necessarily was right for me, because I've always, through my travel, had this thought of, what if I could figure out how to make money and feed my lifestyle and feed my investments and save and build for the future, all while doing the thing that I love doing the most, traveling and surfing. So that's the question that's been in my mind for a long time. And I didn't think that this coffee cart was going to make it possible. So I ended up reading this book whilst I ended up going over traveling with my mate that I was going to start the coffee cart with. And I was reading this book at the time, and it was How to Build a Business Others Want to Buy. And in this book, I came across the concept of drop shipping, and it was like, great, a model where you can kind of, build your income streams, learn about business and e-commerce, and you're not tied to one place in particular. So I suggested to my mate, why don't we start an online coffee business where we essentially connect to all these different suppliers around Australia, and we drop ship their coffee bean under our own brand. And yeah, that was kind of the thought in my mind. This was last year, traveling through Central America. I was having fun surfing in amazing places. Not a great swell season last year, a little quick side note, but still had a lot of fun. And I would highly recommend Central America for anyone that loves surfing and loves a pretty chilled out vibe. Um, but yeah, so kind of thought about that a lot last year. And then we got back home, and it was the having a business partner. We were really trying to get things rolling. We set up a company. We started exploring this drop shipping model with coffee. And it was really difficult to try and communicate because we were at different stages of life. So at this time, I also took the same business model and started to incorporate or started a surf brand called Nuala Australia under the same model, contacted suppliers, got a couple of responses. Yep, you can use our products, no worries, sell them, on-sell them, fantastic. And it was like, great, I've started and we're just getting into it. And that kind of brings us to now. This is how I've gotten to the decision, and this is how I've come to this point. That's been my journey, and there's always been that desire to travel, to surf, to do what I want, but also to try and figure out how I can make money whilst doing those things. And a brick and mortar business wasn't going to be the answer for me because I'd be tied to one particular place. Working for someone else, I just got so tired of that just before I left for Central America, on my way home after my last shift, I said, that's it. I'm done. I'm done working for people because I take on other people's stress very easily. And I thought, you know what, if I'm going to be stressed, at least it's going to be my stress. And that's why I thought, I think it is right for me to to move into a bit more of a development of my own businesses and these sorts of skills. So that was kind of the decision, and that's okay. It's okay to say, no, I'm not going to work for someone else. But now it is my task to figure out how I'm going to make that a reality. Otherwise, on the flip side, I'll have no other choice but to work for someone else. So that was a really pivotal moment as well. And we're at this point now where I know there's lots of different types of business models that I can use, lots of different avenues. But one of my primary goals is I want to be able to work remotely and run businesses and build income streams whilst I'm on the road and still nourishing my lifestyle in that capacity. So that's where I'm at. That's been my process over the last decade. And yeah, I feel like I'm very much at the start of this journey and figuring it out. And we'll go into in a later episode of what I have done over the last 10 months since I've been back from Central America. But I thought I'd just give you a bit of a rundown of my life so far in terms of travel, work, working for others, study, what has been my pain points and what has been my decisions that have led me to this point. Just so if you resonate with any of that, you can have an idea and be like, okay, cool. I've also been there. I've also done that. I've also thought that. And how am I going to take the responsibility for myself to create the life that I want? And that's currently what I'm doing. So I think it's a very important question to ask. And that's what we're asking today. How am I going to take the responsibility for my life if I don't want to work for someone else? And if I want to do what I want, when I want, for as long as I want, how am I going to make that happen? And that's what we're going to figure out together. So stay tuned, like, subscribe, stay with me. We're going to build this journey and we're going to figure it out together and build a beautiful community where we all support each other, because that's what it's all about. So yeah, enjoy, guys.